I exposed my wife's secret affair with my friend by printing every hidden message. The printer hummed softly, its mechanical whirring the only sound in the dimly lit study. Page after page slid out, covered in black ink, each one revealing words that shattered my world a little more. I stood there, staring at the damning evidence, my hands trembling as I reached for another sheet. It all began innocently enough. Just a gut feeling. A subtle shift in her laughter, a guarded look in her eyes when she checked her phone, the way she angled the screen away from me. Emma had always been an open book, but lately her pages were closed, sealed tight, and I could feel the distance between us growing like a shadow. My best friend Jason was the last person I suspected. We'd known each other since college, survived breakups, bad jobs, and endless nights of drunk philosophizing. He was practically family, the one constant in my life besides Emma, but that was before the whisper of suspicion took root, gnawing at my peace. I first noticed it during a dinner party at our house. Jason made Emma laugh, nothing unusual. But the way she laughed, head thrown back, eyes sparkling, was different, intimate. When she touched his arm, her fingers lingered a second too long. He looked at her in a way I recognized, because once she used to look at me like that. I told myself I was imagining things, but doubt, once planted, grows like a weed. I started paying closer attention, piecing together the late nights at work, the unexplained absences, the hastily locked phone. The idea of spying felt wrong, but desperation has a way of justifying the unjustifiable. I bought a keylogger and installed it on our shared laptop. I told myself it was to ease my mind, to prove my paranoia wrong. But when I retrieved the logs, my worst fears were confirmed. There were dozens of messages between them, all hidden, in plain sight. They were smart, using code words, deleting conversations, switching between apps, but they slipped up once. One message was left behind, just enough to crack the facade. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." It was from Jason. The walls of the room seemed to close in. My stomach churned, the air growing heavy as my vision blurred. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I gathered more evidence, each discovery slicing me deeper. The printer continued its relentless churning, spitting out every conversation, every secret rendezvous. I printed everything: texts, emails, photos. I wanted to see it all, to understand how long I'd been made a fool. The pages piled up on the desk, a mountain of betrayal. When Emma came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room, the evidence neatly stacked on the coffee table. She looked at the papers, her face draining of color. I watched her eyes flick over the printed words, widening with horror. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "How long?" My voice was cold, barely a whisper. She sank onto the couch, her hands shaking as she reached for a page. Her eyes glistened with tears, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. But the image of her laughing at Jason's joke flashed before my eyes, and the sympathy evaporated. It just happened. I never meant for it to go this far. She choked out, her voice cracking. "I love you. I never stopped loving you." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You've got a funny way of showing it." I pointed at the pile. "This isn't love. This is betrayal. You and Jason, how could you? He was my best friend. You were my wife. You were everything." Her shoulders shook as she sobbed, but I felt nothing, just numbness. I confronted Jason the next day. We met at our usual spot, the bar where we'd celebrated promotions, birthdays, and bad breakups. He looked surprised to see me, raising his glass in a familiar toast. But when I slammed the stack of papers on the table, his face fell. "You were my brother," I spat, my hands trembling with rage. "How long?" He looked at the evidence, his eyes filled with shame. I didn't mean for it to happen. I lunged at him, fists flying before I even realized what I was doing. The bartender pulled me off him, and Jason just stood there, blood dripping from his nose, not even fighting back. I left him there, broken and defeated, just like he'd left me. The divorce was messy, painful, but there was no going back. I couldn't unsee the betrayal, couldn't forget the laughter they shared, the love that was never meant for me. Months passed. I moved out of the house we once shared, started over in a new city, far away from the memories. One night, my phone buzzed with a message from Jason. "I'm sorry. I lost you, and I lost her. It was never worth it." I deleted it without replying. Time moved on, slowly healing the wounds. But the scars remained, a reminder of the betrayal that shattered my world. I learned to smile again, to trust, even to love. But I never forgot, and I never forgave. I exposed my wife's secret affair with my friend by printing every hidden message. Part 2. The Legal Battle. After confronting Emma and Jason, I thought the worst was behind me. But the anger didn't fade. It grew, festering beneath the surface. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial too. We'd built a life together, accumulated savings, investments, a house. If she was willing to lie about this, what else was she hiding? I wasn't about to be taken for a fool twice. I hired Daniel Collins, a lawyer known for his ruthlessness in divorce cases. His office was clinical, minimalist. No family photos or personal touches, just shelves lined with law books and a desk as organized as his mind. He listened quietly as I laid out everything: the affair, the printed messages, the confrontation. His face was expressionless, his pen scratching across his legal pad. "You did the right thing by documenting everything," Daniel said, flipping through the stack of evidence. "These messages are damning. But if you want to protect yourself, financially we need more." I frowned. More? What else could there be? Daniel leaned back, his eyes sharp. Infidelity isn't just about the act. It's about deception, misuse of marital assets. If she spent money on him, trips, gifts, hotel rooms, it changes the game. We could go after her for dissipation of assets. The idea that she might have spent my hard-earned money on Jason made my blood boil. I nodded. "Do it. Whatever it takes." Daniel didn't waste any time. He hired a forensic accountant, someone who could sift through every bank statement, credit card bill, and receipt to trace her spending. He also brought in a private investigator, someone discreet, who could dig into her digital footprint. If she used burner phones, secret email accounts, or hidden apps, we'd find them. Weeks passed, each one a slow torture. I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the memories, the anger, the pain. But every time I walked into our empty house, it hit me all over again. The echoes of our laughter, the ghost of her touch, the shattered illusion of what we once were. Daniel called one evening, his voice steady. "We found something. You should come in." I drove to his office, dread pooling in my stomach. When I arrived, Daniel was waiting, a thick folder on his desk. He opened it, spreading the contents across the table. Bank statements, hotel receipts, photos. My chest tightened as I scanned them. Emma had used our joint account for everything. She'd booked hotel rooms under a fake name, bought expensive gifts, even paid for plane tickets. She and Jason had traveled together using business trips as a cover. My hands shook as I picked up a receipt from a hotel we used to visit on our anniversaries. The date was recent, just a few weeks before I confronted her. I could almost see them there, laughing, wrapped up in each other. My vision blurred, rage surging through me. Daniel's voice cut through the fog. "It gets worse. The investigator found an encrypted email account. She was planning to leave. There are emails to a real estate agent, inquiries about apartments, discussions about divorce. She was setting up a new life behind your back. I sank into the chair, my body numb. All those nights, she said she was working late. The weekends, she visited her sister. It was all a lie. She'd been slowly detaching herself, preparing to leave me while keeping up the charade. Daniel's eyes were sympathetic, but his tone was all business. This changes everything. We can prove financial misconduct. You'll get the house, the investments, everything. She'll walk away with nothing. It sounded like justice, but it didn't feel like it. It felt hollow. The next day, I filed for divorce. Daniel was meticulous, aggressive, and relentless. He filed a motion for exclusive use of the house, froze our joint accounts, and subpoenaed Jason for a deposition. I wanted him to suffer too. I wanted him to face me, to admit his betrayal under oath. Word got back to Emma quickly. She called, leaving voicemail after voicemail, her voice cracking. As she begged me to talk to her, I deleted each one, my resolve hardening. A week later, she showed up at the house. I found her sitting on the porch, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked small, fragile, nothing like the woman who'd torn my heart out. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered, her voice trembling. I was lost. I got caught up in something I didn't know how to stop. I stared at her, my anger warring with the love I once felt. You didn't know how to stop? You planned to leave me, Emma. You set up a new life behind my back. You made me look like a fool. Her shoulders sagged, tears streaming down her face. I was scared. I was confused, but I never stopped loving you. I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the empty street. Love? You don't destroy someone you love. You don't lie, cheat, and steal from them. You didn't love me. You loved the life I gave you. I exposed my wife's secret affair with my friend by printing every hidden message. Part 3. Unraveling the Web of Lies. The divorce was finalized, but closure was nowhere in sight. Even after winning the legal battle, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The depths of Emma's betrayal haunted me, whispering that I hadn't uncovered everything. Daniel, my lawyer, said it was over. But my gut told me otherwise. If she could lie so convincingly, what else was she hiding? And why did Jason vanish so suddenly? The investigator Daniel hired had been thorough, but I wanted answers, not just evidence. I needed to understand how deep the deception ran. That's when I decided to hire someone else, someone who wasn't bound by legal red tape. His name was Mark Sullivan, a private investigator who worked in the shadows, specializing in uncovering secrets people wanted buried. He was older, grizzled, with eyes that seemed to pierce through lies. He didn't care about courtroom evidence. He cared about the truth. Mark met me at a bar on the outskirts of town, a place where no one asked questions. He listened as I laid out everything, the affair, the messages, the financial deceit, Jason's sudden disappearance. When I finished, Mark leaned back, swirling his whiskey. You're right. There's more to this. People don't just vanish, not without a reason. I nodded. I need to know why. I need to understand how it started and how deep it goes. Mark's lips curled into a half smile. Be careful. What you wish for. Sometimes the truth's uglier than the lie. I didn't care. I needed the truth, no matter how painful. Mark started digging the next day. He was meticulous, methodical. He went through Emma's digital footprint, old emails, social media messages, phone records. He talked to her friends, co-workers, even her family. He traced Jason's last known whereabouts, questioning anyone who might have seen him. The first clue came a week later. Mark called me, his voice tense. I found something. We need to talk. In person. We met at his office, a cluttered room above a pawn shop, filled with filing cabinets and stacks of old case files. He closed the blinds, locking the door behind me. My heart raced. He pulled out a manila folder, spreading photos across his desk. My stomach dropped. It was Emma, meeting with someone I didn't recognize, a man in his 50s, sharp suit, expensive watch. They looked close, too close. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice tight, Mark's jaw clenched. "Robert Langston, divorce attorney." But not just any attorney. He specializes in high-net-worth cases. If she was meeting with him, she wasn't just planning to leave. She was planning to take everything. I stared at the photos, my fists clenching. "When were these taken?" Mark's eyes were cold. "2 months before you found out about the affair." The room spun. 2 months? She'd been planning this even before I knew about Jason? How long had she been plotting? Mark continued, his voice steady. "I looked into her finances. She moved money into a private account, one you didn't know about. Small amounts at first, then larger transfers. She was setting herself up for a clean break. Probably wanted to blindside you with divorce papers." I sank into the chair, my mind reeling. All those moments we spent together, all those nights we shared. She was already planning her exit. Calculating, deceitful, cold. "That's not all," Mark said, his expression grim. "I found Jason." My head snapped up. "Where?" "He's in Florida. New job, new apartment, but here's the kicker. He's not alone." Mark handed me another photo. It was Jason, smiling, his arm around Emma. They looked happy, carefree, like they didn't have a care in the world. I felt sick. All this time they were together, living their new life while I picked up the pieces. But why did she pretend to be sorry? Why the tears, the pleas for forgiveness? It was all an act. Mark's voice cut through my rage. "They've been in contact for years. This wasn't some fling. They were planning this for a long time. The affair was just the tip of the iceberg." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Mark's expression darkened. "Emma and Jason were partners in crime, literally. They set you up, from the beginning." I didn't understand. "Set me up? For what?" Mark spread more documents on the desk, emails, contracts, financial records. "They were after your money, your business. Jason got close to you on purpose, feeding Emma information. They wanted to bankrupt you, take everything. It wasn't just about love, it was about greed." My world collapsed. Jason wasn't just my friend. He was my business partner. He had access to everything: clients, finances, proprietary information. He knew every detail of my life, and he used it against me. "They planned to ruin you," Mark continued. "Emma would get half in the divorce and Jason would take over. Your business. They'd have everything, and you'd be left with nothing." The room spun.
I exposed my wife's secret affair with my friend by printing every hidden message. Part 4. The evidence that changed everything. The air was thick with anticipation as I sat in Mark's dimly lit office, surrounded by stacks of documents and photos.
My heart pounded as I stared at the evidence laid out before me. Every piece painted a clearer picture of the betrayal that had shattered my life. But it wasn't just the affair. I was beginning to see the full extent of their scheme. Mark leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on his desk. "I told you it was bigger than just infidelity. They were playing you from the start." I clenched my jaw, my eyes narrowing. "Show me everything." Mark didn't hesitate. He opened a thick folder, revealing printed emails, bank statements, and encrypted messages I never knew existed. "They were smart," he admitted. "Used a private messaging app, but nothing. Stays hidden forever." I pulled the records from Jason's old phone number. This is every message they sent, uncensored. My hands trembled as I picked up the first printout. The conversation was casual at first. Jason asking Emma how her day was, Emma complaining about mundane things. But then it took a turn. Jason, did you move the money yet? We need to stick to the plan. Emma, yes, just like we discussed. He's clueless. Jason, good. Once the account is cleared, I'll handle the rest. Emma, I can't wait to be done with him. You're the only one I want. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. She wasn't just cheating, she was plotting against me and Jason. Jason was in on it the whole time. My best friend, my business partner, the man who stood beside me at my wedding, he was the mastermind. I flipped through more messages, each one a stab to my heart. They discussed financial transfers, strategic manipulation, and even conversations. They staged to make me look irrational, laying the groundwork for a divorce that would paint me as the villain. They weren't just having an affair, I muttered, my voice shaking. They were setting me up, destroying my reputation, my business, everything. Mark's gaze was cold. They wanted to bankrupt you. Jason knew your company inside and out. He was siphoning funds through fake invoices, shell companies. It was a long con. And you were the mark. I sank into the chair, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. How did I not see this? How could I have been so blind? Mark's expression softened just for a moment. Because you trusted them. That's what made you vulnerable. But now you know the truth. I looked back at the messages, at Emma's words of affection and manipulation. She played her part perfectly, comforting me when work was tough, encouraging me when I felt like giving up. But it was all calculated. Every hug, every kiss, every smile, it was all a lie. They thought they were smarter than you, Mark continued. Thought they could take everything and walk away clean. But they were sloppy. They got arrogant. I slammed my fist on the desk, the room echoing with my rage. I want them to pay. I want them to feel the same pain they inflicted on me. I want them to lose everything. Mark's eyes gleamed with a cold satisfaction. Then we hit them where it hurts. But we do it smart. We play the long game, just like they did. My heart pounded, anger boiling into resolve. I want to expose them, publicly. I want the world to see them for who they really are. Mark grinned, his demeanor shifting. Then it's time we print every hidden message, every fraudulent transaction, and make sure the world sees the truth. We spent hours compiling the evidence. Mark knew the system better than anyone, organizing everything in chronological order, showing the evolution of their scheme. From the first flirtatious messages to the meticulous financial theft, we connected every dot. By the end of the night, we had a complete narrative, a web of lies, deception, and greed. But the pièce de résistance was the final message. Emma, I love you, Jason. Can't wait to start our new life. Once he's out of the picture. My blood ran cold. Out of the picture? Did they plan more than just financial ruin? My mind raced through every argument, every suspicious accident, every near miss. Had they been trying to get rid of me? Permanently? I looked at Mark, my voice barely a whisper. You don't think? His face was grim. It's possible. People like them, they don't stop at betrayal. They eliminate obstacles. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't just fighting for revenge, I was fighting for my life. Mark stood, his posture rigid. We're not done yet. If they plan to take you out, we need proof. And if they did, they're going to prison. My hands shook, adrenaline pumping through me. Then let's finish this. I want every secret exposed, every lie brought to light. I want them to pay for everything. Mark nodded, his eyes fierce. Then let's make sure they never see it coming. The investigation wasn't over. He regretted cheating with her. Part 2, the weight of consequences. David Mercer sat in his office, the blinds drawn, a half-empty glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. His mind replayed the same memory over and over. The night he first kissed. Claire. It had been electric, forbidden, exhilarating, but now all he felt was regret. His phone buzzed, the screen flashing with a message from her. "We need to talk. Urgently." David's chest tightened. Every conversation with Claire was a reminder of the biggest mistake of his life. He had fallen for her charm, her cunning smile, the way she looked at him like he was the only man in the room. But it was all an illusion, a trap he willingly walked into. He tossed back the whiskey. The burn in his throat nothing compared to the guilt clawing at him. Claire was more than just an affair. She was a master manipulator, and he was her fool. His wife's face flashed in his mind, Emily's warm eyes, her trusting smile. The woman who stood by him through every high and low, who loved him unconditionally. He betrayed her for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a pawn in her twisted game. The door creaked open, and his assistant poked her head in. "Mr. Mercer, Claire is here to see you." His heart sank. He knew this conversation was inevitable, but that didn't make it any easier. "Send her in," he muttered, setting the glass down and bracing himself. Claire walked in, her posture confident, eyes sharp. She wore her power like a tailored suit, her presence filling the room. She closed the door behind her, locking it with a deliberate click. "We need to talk about damage control," she said, her voice cold and businesslike. David scoffed, shaking his head. "Damage control? Is that all you care about?" Claire's eyes narrowed. "I care about surviving. You should too. Your little confession to him has made things complicated." His jaw tightened. I had to tell him the truth. He deserved to know who was ruining his life. She laughed, a bitter, mocking sound. "You were always too soft, David. That's why you needed me. To do what you couldn't." He stood, anger boiling over. "I never needed you. I was weak. I was stupid. But I'm done lying." Claire's expression darkened, her eyes flashing with something dangerous. "You think you can just walk away after everything we've done?" David's shoulders tensed. "We? This was your plan, Claire. You used me to destroy him, and I was too blind to see it." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You wanted this as much as I did. Don't pretend you're innocent. You wanted him to suffer. You enjoyed every moment of it." His chest tightened, shame washing over him. She was right. At first, he did enjoy it. He envied the man who had everything, power, respect, the perfect wife. It was so easy to fall into Claire's web of deceit, to believe her lies about being trapped in a loveless marriage, but now everything was ruined. His marriage, his career, his soul, all because he couldn't resist temptation. "I regret every second I spent with you," he spat, his voice shaking. "You were a mistake." Claire's face hardened, her jaw clenching. "You don't get to walk away. Not now. Not after everything we did together." David met her gaze, his resolve firm. "I'm done being your puppet. I'm going to make things right, even if it destroys me." Claire's eyes flickered with rage, her hands balling into fists. "You think he'll forgive you? You think you can just confess and everything will be fine?" She laughed, cold and venomous. "You're just as guilty as I am. You were the one who ruined his life. I just gave you the opportunity." David's chest heaved with anger and guilt. "You're a monster, Claire." She leaned in, her voice a chilling whisper. "I'm whatever I need to be to survive. And if you get in my way, I'll destroy you too." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out, leaving him standing alone in his office, her words echoing in his mind. David sank into his chair, his head in his hands. He regretted every choice that led him to this moment, every lie he told, every promise he broke. He thought he could control the situation, that he could have it all. But he was wrong. Now his life was falling apart, and there was no one to blame but himself. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Claire. "Choose wisely, David. There's no going back." He stared at the words, a cold chill running down his spine. Claire was right. There was no undoing what he had done. But maybe, just maybe, he could still make things right, even if it cost him everything. I carefully planned my revenge. Part 2, the setup. Standing in the shadows of the dimly lit alley, I watched Claire's silhouette pass by the frosted glass of her office window. Her life looked so perfect from the outside. Successful career, a network of influential friends, and the charm to manipulate anyone who stood in her way. But I knew the truth. I knew the lies she built her empire on, the deceit she crafted with calculated precision. She took everything from me. My trust, my love, my dignity. And she did it all without a hint of remorse. But she underestimated me. She thought I would crumble, that I would accept her betrayal and disappear quietly. She was wrong. I took a deep breath, steadying my resolve. I spent months planning every detail, anticipating every move she would make. This wasn't about anger or revenge for the sake of vengeance. It was about justice. It was about exposing her for who she truly was, a master manipulator who used people like pawns on a chessboard. I had to be meticulous. Claire was smart, cunning even. She covered her tracks well, hid behind layers of deception that would take a master strategist to unravel. But that's exactly who I became. I spent weeks collecting evidence, hacking into her email accounts, combing through her financial records. Every secret transaction, every hidden correspondence with David Mercer, it was all there, buried beneath her perfect facade, Mercer. He was just as guilty as she was, if not more. He knew she was married, knew what she was doing to me, and still chose to be a part of it. They both deserved to fall. I hired a private investigator, not to find proof. I already had that. But to set the trap. I needed them to feel safe, to believe they were still in control. Only then would they make the mistakes I needed. My phone vibrated. A message from my lawyer. "The documents are ready. She won't see it coming." I smiled, the first genuine smile in months. It was all falling into place. I knew Claire well enough to predict her every move. Her arrogance was her weakness. She believed she was untouchable, that no one could outsmart her. I made sure to play the part, the broken husband, too devastated to fight back. I stopped calling, stopped confronting her about the affair, stopped showing any emotion. I made her believe I was defeated. Meanwhile, I was carefully dismantling her world, piece by piece. The first step was the financials. Claire was brilliant at hiding her assets, but she was also greedy. She couldn't resist funneling money into offshore accounts, building a safety net in case things went south. She never imagined I would find them. I did more than find them. I traced every transaction, linking them to shell companies she set up under Mercer's name. They thought they were clever, but they were sloppy. All it took was one careless email, one digital paper trail, and I had them. I forwarded the evidence to my lawyer, who ensured it was admissible in court. Claire wouldn't just lose her money, she'd be facing charges for fraud and embezzlement. Next was her reputation. Claire lived for her image. To the outside world, she was a respected businesswoman, a role model. But I knew the truth. She climbed her way to the top by sabotaging her rivals, using blackmail and deceit. I made sure to collect testimonies from people she wronged, former colleagues who were too afraid to speak out before. Once they realized she was vulnerable, they were eager to reveal her secrets. I crafted an anonymous tip, sending it to every major news outlet. When the story broke, her name would be ruined. The final step was the confrontation. I needed her to know it was me, that I was the one who destroyed her. She needed to understand the pain she caused, to see her empire crumble before her eyes. I watched as she left her office, her head held high, oblivious to the storm coming her way. I followed her at a distance, knowing exactly where she was going, to Mercer's apartment. It was their safe haven, the place they thought no one knew about. They were wrong about that, too. I took out my phone and made the call. "It's time. Send the documents to Mercer's wife." Claire thought she was the only one who could play the game, but I learned from the best. I learned from her, and now it was my move. I carefully planned my revenge. Part 3, The Trap Springs. I watched from my car as Claire entered Mercer's apartment building, her gait confident, unaware of the consequences that were about to unfold. I knew every detail of their routine. How she'd stay for exactly 2 hours, how they'd order takeout from the same overpriced sushi place, how they'd laugh and toast to their own cleverness. Today, their celebration would be short-lived. I pulled out my phone and opened the surveillance app, the hidden cameras I installed in Mercer's apartment streaming live footage. I watched as she walked in, dropping her purse on the couch before leaning in to kiss him. They looked so smug, so untouchable. It made my blood boil, but I stayed calm. I couldn't let anger cloud my judgment. Not now. Everything was meticulously planned. One wrong move, and it could all fall apart. I switched to the second camera feed, positioned above his desk. The documents were there, contracts linking, Claire and Mercer's names to the offshore accounts. They didn't even bother to hide them. They were so arrogant, so sure of themselves. It was time to shatter that confidence. I dialed Mercer's wife, Vanessa. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. "Hello? It's me. Check your email," I said, my tone steady, almost cold. "You deserve to know the truth." I hung up before she could respond, knowing she would find the evidence. The affair, the stolen money, the betrayal, everything was laid out in black and white, undeniable. Within minutes, my phone buzzed again. It was the private investigator. "Vanessa's on her way. She's furious." I leaned back, satisfaction washing over me. It was all falling into place. Claire and Mercer thought they were safe, hidden behind their lies and deceit. But the walls were closing in. I watched the camera feed as Vanessa stormed into the apartment, her face red with anger, her voice echoing through the room. "How could you do this to me? To our family?" Claire's face paled, her confidence crumbling. She looked at Mercer, her eyes wide with shock. "You said she'd never find out," Mercer stammered, his facade breaking. I don't know how she found out." I allowed myself a grim smile. They were turning on each other just as I knew they would. The trust they built on lies was shattering before their eyes. Vanessa threw the printed emails at Mercer, the evidence scattering across the floor. "You were stealing from us? From our children?" Claire tried to intervene, her voice pleading. "Vanessa, listen, it's not what it looks like. Don't you dare!" Vanessa shouted, her fury now directed at Claire. "I trusted you. I welcomed you into my home, and you did this?" Claire's mask slipped, her expression turning cold. "Oh, grow up, Vanessa. You were so naive. You never even saw it coming." I watched the scene unfold, my pulse steady, my heart untouched by their chaos. They were finally facing the consequences of their actions, the lives they destroyed, the pain they caused. I waited until Vanessa stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Claire turned to Mercer, her face contorted with anger. "You idiot! How could you let this happen?" Mercer's shoulders sagged. I don't know how." He looked genuinely confused, his arrogance replaced by fear. He never imagined his perfect little world could collapse so quickly. I switched to the third camera feed, the one outside the building. Vanessa was standing by her car, her phone pressed to her ear. I knew who she was calling. Her lawyer. My lawyer called me moments later, his voice brimming with satisfaction. It's done. Vanessa is filing for divorce, and she's going after the offshore accounts. They'll be bankrupt within weeks. I exhaled slowly, the weight on my chest easing. It was working. Everything was going according to plan. But I wasn't finished yet. Claire needed to lose more than just her affair. She needed to lose everything. I opened my laptop and sent the anonymous tip to the news outlets. The story of a respected businesswoman embezzling company funds, of her secret affair with a high-profile executive, of the scandal that would ruin her career. It didn't take long for the first headline to appear: corporate power couple exposed in embezzlement and affair scandal. I watched the article go live, the news spreading like wildfire. Social media exploded, comments pouring in with shock and outrage. Claire's perfect image was shattered. My phone buzzed. It was Claire. I let it ring, then watched the voicemail transcript appear. "I don't know how you did this, but I know it's you. You think you've won? This isn't over." I deleted the message, my expression calm. She was wrong. It was over. I watched the camera feed one last time, Claire and Mercer standing in the ruins of their lies, their world crumbling around them. I closed the laptop and drove away, leaving them to face the chaos they created. Revenge wasn't about anger or hate, it was about justice. I carefully planned my revenge. Part 4. The Final Blow. Days turned into weeks, and the fallout from the scandal was nothing short of spectacular. Claire's name was splashed across every news outlet, her reputation obliterated. Her company's stock plummeted, investors pulled out, and board members demanded her resignation. Mercer didn't fare any better. Vanessa's divorce lawyers were ruthless, freezing his assets and exposing his offshore accounts. His credibility in the business world was shattered, and clients fled in droves. They were paying the price for their deceit, just as I planned. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. They still had each other. They still believed they could rebuild, that they could weather the storm together. I needed to break that illusion. I knew Claire better than she knew herself. Her loyalty was only as deep as her ambitions. The moment Mercer became a liability, she would cut him loose. And I knew exactly how to make that happen. I arranged a meeting with Mercer. He was desperate, his life falling apart at the seams, his empire crumbling. I knew he would show up, hoping for a way out. We met at an upscale bar downtown, the kind of place where people wore their wealth like armor. Mercer looked out of place, his usual confidence replaced by desperation. He looked at me with contempt, but there was also fear in his eyes. He knew I was behind it all, but he couldn't prove it. I ordered a drink, taking my time before speaking. "You look terrible, David." He clenched his jaw, his hands shaking as he reached for his glass. "What do you want?" I leaned back, feigning nonchalance. "I want to help you," he scoffed. "Help me? After everything you've done?" I met his gaze, my expression cold. "You did this to yourself. You chose to betray me. You chose to steal from your own family." He looked away, guilt flickering across his face. "Good. He should feel guilty," I continued, my voice steady. "But I'm willing to let you walk away if you give me Claire." His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" "I have enough evidence to bury you both," I said, my tone matter of fact. "But Claire is the mastermind. She orchestrated everything, manipulated you, used you as a pawn. I want her to pay for it." Mercer looked at me, suspicion clouding his features. "Why should I trust you?" I shrugged. "You don't have a choice. Claire is already planning her escape. She's liquidating her assets, moving her money overseas. She's going to leave you to take the fall." His face paled. "You're lying." I slid a folder across the table, filled with copies of Claire's financial transactions. "See for yourself." He opened it, his hands trembling as he scanned the documents. his face twisted with anger, betrayal sinking in. That bitch! I hid my satisfaction, keeping my expression neutral. I can make this all go away. I can protect you from the legal fallout. But you need to give me everything you have on Claire, emails, recordings, anything that proves she was the mastermind. He hesitated, the weight of his decision heavy in the air. Then, his shoulders sagged in defeat. Fine. I'll give you what you want. I nodded, standing up to leave. Smart choice. I'll be in touch. As I walked out, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. Mercer was a coward, just as I expected. He would betray Claire to save himself, just as he betrayed me. The next step was easy. I forwarded all of Mercer's evidence to the authorities, along with the documents linking Claire to the offshore accounts. The case against her was airtight. I watched from a distance as they arrested her, the shock and disbelief on her face a sweet victory. She fought, of course, denying everything, claiming innocence. But the evidence was overwhelming, her empire crumbling under the weight of her lies. Mercer tried to salvage his reputation by cooperating with the investigation, but it was too late. He was exposed as a co-conspirator, his name forever tainted. I went to the courthouse the day Claire's trial began, watching as she was paraded in front of the cameras, her arrogance replaced by fear. She looked at me, her eyes burning with hatred. I smiled, the victory bittersweet. She destroyed my life, took everything from me. But now, she was the one who lost everything. My lawyer approached me, his expression triumphant. It's over. She's facing multiple charges, fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. She won't get out of this. I nodded, a weight lifting off my shoulders. It was over. As I walked away from the courthouse, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. Revenge was supposed to be satisfying, but it wasn't. It didn't erase the pain, the betrayal, the years I spent loving someone who never existed. But it was justice, and that was enough. Or so I thought, until I received a message that night. A single line that sent a chill down my spine. You may have won this round, but the game isn't over. See, Claire's arrogance was her downfall, but her cunning was her weapon. I carefully planned my revenge. Part 5. Shadows of the Past. The message haunted me, its meaning echoing in my mind long after I read it. How could she have sent it? Claire was behind bars, facing charges that would keep her locked up for decades. Yet the taunt felt too real, too precise. I tried to dismiss it as her desperate attempt to cling to power, to rattle me even as her world fell apart. But paranoia crept in, whispering that Claire's reach extended further than I realized. The following days were eerily quiet. No more messages. No signs of anyone watching. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. I doubled my security, installed cameras around my house, and even hired a private investigator to keep tabs on Claire's known associates. Nothing. It was as if the threat had evaporated, leaving me questioning my sanity. Until one evening, when I returned home to find the front door slightly ajar. I hesitated, my heart racing as I reached for the gun I started carrying since the day Claire's betrayal was exposed. I entered cautiously, scanning every corner, every shadow. Everything seemed untouched, until I reached my office. The drawers were open, papers scattered across the floor. My computer screen flickered, displaying a single message. Did you really think you won? My blood ran cold. Claire was behind bars. There was no way she could have orchestrated this, but the message carried her signature malice, her cunning. It was as if she was still playing the game from a distance. The security footage revealed nothing. Whoever broke in knew exactly where the cameras were, avoiding them with precision. I watched the footage over and over, searching for a clue, a shadow, anything. But there was nothing. I knew then that Claire wasn't working alone. She had an ally, a ghost who moved in the shadows, carrying out her will. The next day, I visited Claire in prison. I needed to see her, to look her in the eyes and confirm she was truly locked away. She looked different, her once perfect appearance now marred by the harsh reality of prison life. But her eyes were the same, cold, calculating, and filled with contempt. She smirked when she saw me. To what do I owe the pleasure? I sat down, refusing to show any weakness. You sent someone to my house. She feigned innocence, her expression mocking. I have no idea what you're talking about. I've been in here, thanks to you. I leaned in, my voice low. The game is over, Claire. Give it up. She laughed, a chilling sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Oh, darling, the game is just beginning. I tried to read her, to see if she was bluffing, but Claire was a master manipulator. I couldn't tell if she was playing with my mind or if she truly had someone on the outside. Stood up, my hands clenched. You lost. You have nothing left. Her eyes gleamed with malice. You think you've won because I'm in here? You're so naive. I built an empire. Did you really think I wouldn't have contingencies? A cold knot formed in my stomach. Who's helping you? She smiled, leaning back as if she had all the time in the world. Someone who hates you just as much as I do. I felt a chill run down my spine. Who could hate me that much? I went through every possibility, former business rivals, people who lost out because of Claire's schemes, even old friends who turned their backs. But no one stood out. She watched me struggle, her satisfaction evident. You won't figure it out. You're smart, but not smart enough. I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing my fear. Who is it, Claire? She leaned forward, her expression cold. You should be more worried about what they're going to do next. I left the prison unsettled, my mind racing with possibilities. Claire was taunting me, but she never made empty threats. Someone was out there continuing her vendetta, but who and why? Then it hit me. There was one name I hadn't considered, someone who disappeared the moment Claire's empire crumbled. Elliot Vance. I remembered the stories, the whispers about him being Claire's fixer, the man who made her enemies disappear without a trace. I thought he was just a myth, an exaggeration to build Claire's legend. But what if he was real? What if he was the one helping her now? I dug into Elliot's past, finding little more than shadows. He was a ghost, no records, no photos, just whispers of a man who could erase anyone who stood in his way. And then I found it. An old article about a corporate scandal, a whistleblower who vanished without a trace. The last person he met with was Elliot Vance. I realized then that I was up against more than just Claire. I was up against the man who protected her empire from the shadows, the man who was now hunting me. I wasn't just a target. I was his next victim. The message that night confirmed it. You should have stayed down. Evie Elliot Vance was real, and he was coming for me. The game wasn't over. It was just getting started. I carefully planned my revenge. Part 6. The Ghost in the Shadows, Elliot Vance. The name was a ghost, whispered in corporate boardrooms and hushed gatherings. A man who existed only in the shadows, erasing problems with precision and leaving no trace. And now, he was coming for me. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and vigilance. I barely slept, every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind making me reach for the gun under my pillow. I changed my routines, never taking the same route twice, constantly looking over my shoulder. But no matter how careful I was, Elliot was always one step ahead. Packages started arriving at my doorstep, unsigned envelopes with old photographs of me and Claire back when we were happy before the lies. There were even candid shots of me from the past week, evidence that he was watching, studying me. The most chilling was a picture of me sleeping, taken from inside my own bedroom. I bolted the doors and windows that night, double-checking every lock, but it was clear that Elliot could get in whenever he wanted. I couldn't live like this. I needed to go on the offensive. I turned to the private investigator who helped me gather evidence against Claire, a man named Nolan Reed, a former cop with connections in places most people didn't even know existed. Nolan was skeptical when I first mentioned Elliot. "Vance? People say he's just a story, a boogeyman made up to scare corporate bigwigs." "He's real," I insisted, showing him the photos. "And he's coming after me." Nolan studied the pictures, his face darkening. "Who the hell? Did you piss off to get Vance on your tail?" "Claire," I replied. "She's pulling the strings from prison. This is her revenge." Nolan's jaw tightened. "Then we need to move fast. If Vance is involved, he's already 10 steps ahead. We'll have to play dirty." He started digging, using his network of informants and contacts to find any trace of Elliot. But each lead ended in a dead end, every name erased, every witness too afraid to speak. Vance was a master at staying invisible. Then one night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, my finger hovering over the screen. A distorted voice came through, garbled and mechanical. "You think you can hunt me?" It was Elliot. "You're just another target. I will bury you." The call ended before I could respond. Nolan traced the number, but it led to a burner phone, discarded and wiped clean. Vance was taunting me, letting me know that he was always one step ahead. I realized then that I couldn't fight him on his terms. He was too skilled, too elusive. I needed to change the rules. That's when I came up with the plan, a trap that would force Elliot out of the shadows. I called Claire's lawyer, the one who defended her during the trial, and fed him a story. I had new evidence that could reduce her sentence, proof that she was coerced by someone else. The bait worked. A week later, I received another call. This time, it wasn't Elliot. It was Claire. Her voice was colder than I remembered. "You think you're clever? Digging up old ghosts?" "I know about Vance," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're using him to come after me, but he's not untouchable." She laughed, the sound dripping with malice. "You don't understand, do you? Elliot isn't working for me. He's doing this because he wants to. You made an enemy out of the wrong man." My blood ran cold. If Vance wasn't doing this for Claire, then why? She must have sensed my confusion because she continued, her voice mocking. "Did you really think I was the only one you betrayed? Elliot lost everything because of you. He's just finishing what I started." Before I could ask what she meant, the line went dead. I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, Claire's words replaying in my mind. What had I done to Elliot Vance? I didn't even know the man. How could I have ruined his life? Nolan found the answer. Buried deep in corporate archives was a name, Elliot Vance, former corporate fixer for a rival company I had taken down during a hostile takeover. The company went bankrupt, and everyone associated with it was blacklisted, including Vance. I remembered that deal. It was ruthless, calculated. I didn't just destroy a company, I destroyed lives. Elliot must have been one of them. He wasn't. Coming after me for Claire. He was coming after me for revenge. I was his target, his obsession, and now he was finishing the job. The game had changed. It wasn't about Claire anymore. It was about survival. I called Nolan, my voice steely with resolve. "We're going after him. I don't care how invisible he thinks he is. We're going to end this." But deep down, I knew Elliot was waiting for me to make that move. The hunter had become the hunted, and Elliot Vance was about to show me just how dangerous a ghost could be. I carefully planned my revenge. Part 7. The final trap. The night felt different. The air was heavy, charged with a sense of inevitability. I had done everything I could to prepare, alerted Nolan, reinforced my home security, and even set up a few countermeasures. But deep down, I knew that none of it would matter if I didn't make my move now. Nolan and I sat in my office, staring at the screens filled with data, surveillance footage, and clues that led nowhere. Vance was like a phantom, slipping through every attempt to corner him. Every move I made, he countered. Every plan I devised, he shattered with ease. "How do we trap a ghost, Nolan?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. Nolan didn't answer immediately. He stared at the monitors, his expression hard, calculating. "We don't," I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "We don't trap him," Nolan said, his voice low. "We make him come to us. We give him what he wants." I frowned, trying to follow his logic. "What's that?" "A challenge." Nolan's eyes met mine. "Vance doesn't care about Claire anymore. He cares about you. You're the one who took everything from him, who ruined his life. What's the one thing he wants more than anything?" I thought for a moment. "To destroy me." "Exactly." Nolan stood up, pulling up a map of the city on the screen. "So we make him believe we're letting our guard down. We make him think we're vulnerable. And when he strikes, we'll be ready." I didn't like it. It felt like a game I wasn't prepared to play, baiting a man who had already proven he could erase me from existence. But I couldn't see any other way. The plan was set. We leaked information to a few trusted contacts, hinting that I was leaving the city, that I had business elsewhere, something easy for Elliot to track. We made it look like I was abandoning everything, dropping my guard. In reality, Nolan and I set up surveillance points, and I arranged for a meeting that only Vance could walk into, a meeting that would lead him directly into our trap. We chose a warehouse on the edge of the city, a place I knew well, a place where business deals had been made, secrets whispered, and lives changed forever. It was the perfect setting, the kind of place where Vance would feel safe, where he would think I was hiding my weakness. The night of the meeting, I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I knew this was the moment, the point of no return. There would be no walking away from it, no turning back. I arrived early, alone, my pulse quickening with every step I took into the dark, cavernous space. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the hollow emptiness. I stood there waiting, knowing Vance would come when he was ready. The minutes dragged on, stretching into what felt like hours. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind that rattled the windows set my nerves on edge. I was no longer just fighting Claire or Vance. I was fighting my own fear. Then I heard it. A soft click of a door opening, followed by the faintest shuffle of footsteps. My heart stopped. He was here. I turned, and there he was. Elliot Vance. His silhouette emerged from the shadows, tall, imposing, with a calmness that unnerved me. He stepped forward slowly, as if savoring the moment. His eyes locked onto mine, cold and unreadable. "So you finally decided to face me," Vance said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. "I was starting to think you were too scared." I forced a smile, trying to mask the dread that was building inside me. "I thought you'd appreciate the challenge." Vance chuckled, the sound echoing around the empty space. "A challenge? You think you can outsmart me? I've been one step ahead of you from the moment you crossed me. You have no idea what you're dealing with." I didn't answer. I just watched him, waiting for him to make the first move. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving mine. "You know, I could have let you walk away, but you had to get involved. You had to play hero. And now look where we are. You didn't give me much of a choice," I shot back. Vance stopped in front of me, his presence overwhelming. "You think you can stop me? You think you can win this? The fact that you're still standing here, breathing, is a mistake." I winced, ready for anything. But then, he did something unexpected. He smiled. a slow, sinister smile that sent a chill down my spine. You've made one final miscalculation, though. I narrowed my eyes, instinctively stepping back. What are you talking about? Vance reached into his coat and pulled out a file, handing it to me. I took it, confusion creeping into my thoughts. What's this? He gestured to the file. The last piece of the puzzle. You've been so focused on Claire, on me, but you've missed something important. Something bigger. Something that will make all of this seem like a child's game. My hands trembled as I opened the file, the papers inside shaking under the dim light. I scanned the contents, my mind racing as the pieces started. I carefully planned my revenge. Part 8, The Unraveling Truth. The words echoed in my mind as I stared at the papers in my hands. You've been played, my friend. Vance's calm demeanor now felt like the calm before a storm, and the unease crawling. Beneath my skin was suffocating. The documents in my hands were undeniable, proof of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond Claire, beyond me, even beyond Elliot. The name at the top, my own, seemed to burn into my vision. It was the final puzzle piece, the one thing that could unravel everything. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of the disjointed facts. What was this? A detailed record of my business, dealings, my financial history, every move I'd made in the last few years. Things I thought only I knew. And yet here it was, laid out before me, as though someone had been watching my every step. I looked up at Elliot, his smile never faltering. What is this? My voice was barely a whisper, but the weight of the words hung in the air like a death sentence. Do you really think you're in control? That you're the one who's been playing the game? Vance's eyes glittered with a cold amusement. You're just a pawn, just like the rest of them. Who the hell are you working for? I demanded, a surge of anger rising. Vance took a step closer, the smile slipping into something darker, more menacing. It's not who I'm working for that matters. It's who you've been working for. You see, while you were focused on Claire and your petty revenge, I was setting up the perfect storm, and now you're standing in the middle of it. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Betrayal seemed to be coming from all directions. First Claire, then Elliot, and now, as the truth began to sink in, even I had been a part of it. I turned the page over, my heart pounding, and saw what I had been too blind to notice before. The names weren't just random. They were connected to a much larger web of power, a network of influential figures with their own agendas. People I had crossed unknowingly or not, and at the center of it all, my own company, my own success. It was a masterstroke, an intricate manipulation designed to turn me into a liability, a target. Someone had been using me as a stepping stone all along, pushing me to make the wrong decisions, leading me down a path where I'd unknowingly contribute to their goals. I was no longer just a victim of Claire's betrayal or even Elliot's pursuit. I was a piece in a far greater game. Who did this? I asked again, my voice thick with disbelief. Vance stepped back, his gaze cold and calculating. You'll figure it out soon enough. You've always been good at connecting the dots, haven't you? But I didn't have time to dwell on the rising dread. A noise from behind me snapped my attention back to the present. It was the unmistakable sound of a door opening, and then a voice, familiar, yet somehow foreign. Long time no see. My old friend. I spun around, heart racing. Standing in the doorway was someone I hadn't seen in years, David Mercer. I froze. It was like seeing a ghost, one I thought had been erased from my life. The man I had once trusted, the man who had once been my closest friend now stood before me, his eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite place. You? I breathed, my mind struggling to process the sight of him. David smiled, but it wasn't the friendly grin I remembered. It was a smile that belonged to someone who had long since abandoned any pretense of loyalty. Surprised to see me? he asked, stepping fully into the room. I'd have thought you would have connected the dots by now. But then you've always been a little slow on the uptake. Vance didn't seem surprised by his arrival. He simply nodded, as if everything was proceeding exactly as planned. David's gaze flicked to the papers in my hands, then back to me. I see you've been doing some digging. But you've missed the most important part of the story. I looked. Between the two men, my stomach sinking. What are you saying? David took a step forward, his voice smooth and cold. I'm saying that everything you've been through, everything you thought was a betrayal, it's all been a setup. You were never supposed to succeed. Claire, Elliot, me, none of us were working against you. We were all working for something bigger. And you, well, you were the perfect pawn in our little game. The weight of his words hit me like a freight train. My mind raced, trying to process the enormity of the revelation. So, you've been using me? All along? David's smile widened. Oh, it's not just you, my friend, it's everyone. You were just the easiest target, the one who'd fall for it the hardest. And now, look where we are. I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I could feel the world slipping away. Every choice I had made, every decision, every betrayal, it had all been orchestrated. Why? I managed to rasp, my voice cracking under the weight of the question. David's eyes gleamed with amusement. I carefully planned my revenge. Part 9, the final play. David's fleeting hesitation was the crack I needed. In that moment, the truth settled into my bones with a cold, furious clarity. This entire thing, this web of lies and manipulation, had never been about Claire or even about me. It had always been about power, control, and a scheme that had been playing out far beyond my comprehension. But now, in the face of everything they had thrown at me, I realized something. I wasn't powerless anymore. I took a deep breath and folded the papers back into the file, my mind racing. They thought they had me cornered, thought I was the pawn. But I had one last card to play, one they hadn't seen coming. David and Vance exchanged a look, sensing the shift. The air in the room had changed. The control they thought they had was slipping, and they both knew it. You've got one move. Left, huh? David chuckled darkly, his voice dripping with smug superiority. What's it going to be, then? You don't even know who you're up against. I met his gaze, unwavering. You're right. I don't know who's behind this. But I know what you've been doing. I know how you've been pulling the strings. And it's time to turn the tables. Vance stepped forward, a glint of amusement in his eyes. Do you think you can outsmart us now? After all this? I didn't answer him immediately. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small device. In the chaos, I had slipped it into the hands of my lawyer, Nolan, earlier that day. It was a simple tracker, one that would allow me to track their every move from here on, out. But the real beauty of it lay in its simplicity. David's smirk faltered as he saw the device in my hand. He looked from me to Vance, his eyes narrowing. What is that? A parting gift, I said. You'll want to remember this, David, because you're about to see everything you thought you were in control of come crashing down around you. Before they could react. I pressed a button on the tracker. The lights in the room flickered briefly, then everything seemed to fall into place. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed with a notification. Nolan had done his part. The tracker, hidden in the warehouse, had triggered an alarm that sent a signal directly to the police. And with the network of surveillance I had set up earlier, the authorities were already en route. Fast, David's face twisted in confusion, his earlier arrogance melting away as realization hit. You're bluffing, he said, trying to recover. But there was a quiver in his voice. You were right about one thing, I said, stepping forward. I wasn't paying attention before, but now I see the bigger picture. It's over. You're both finished. I saw it then. the moment when they understood. The game had changed. They were no longer in control. They weren't the hunters anymore. They were the prey. David's smirk finally faded, replaced by something far less confident: fear. "You think you've won?" he spat, trying to regain his composure. "You think this is over?" "No," I said softly. "It's just begun." As the sirens wailed in the distance, I stepped back, the satisfaction of knowing I had outsmarted them washing over me like a wave. But even as the reality of the moment settled in, I knew this was far from a clean victory. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. David and Vance would face the consequences of their actions, but I still had to deal with the aftermath of everything. I had learned the truth about Claire, about my own life being manipulated, about how deeply my trust had been broken. But in that moment, as the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, I knew one thing for sure. This chapter was finally coming to a close. I turned to leave the warehouse, the weight of the past few months heavy in my chest. The moment I stepped outside, I felt a surge of relief. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had regained control. The game had been rigged against me, but I had taken it back. The world wasn't done with me yet, but I wasn't done fighting either. I carefully planned my revenge. Part 10. The Final Judgment. The sirens grew louder as I walked out of the warehouse, each step carrying a sense of finality. I had played my cards carefully, each move deliberate, and now the pieces were falling into place. But as the weight of the victory started to sink in, I couldn't help but feel the creeping shadow of doubt. This was just the beginning, wasn't it? I stood outside, my breath clouding in the cold night air, staring at the flashing lights in the distance. I had taken down David and Vance. I had outsmarted them at their own game. But there were still unanswered questions, still remnants of the past I wasn't sure I could escape. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Nolan, my lawyer, the one person who had stood by me through this entire mess. "It's done. They're on their way to lock them up. We've got everything we need. No way out for them now." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But there was still something gnawing at me. Something unfinished. I turned away from the flashing lights and walked towards my car, the weight of the last few months pressing down on me. Every decision, every action had led me to this point. I'd won, but the cost was more than I had ever anticipated. As I pulled out of the parking lot, the sound of sirens fading into the night, my thoughts drifted to Claire. I hadn't forgotten about her. How could I? She had been the spark that ignited this entire chain of events. And now, as I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized something. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about exposing her lies or catching her in the act. No, it was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. But even now, as I prepared to face whatever the aftermath might be, I knew there was no easy closure. Hours later, I found myself standing at the foot of the prison visiting room. Claire's name was still fresh in my mind, but I couldn't bring myself to make the call. I had won, yes. But that victory hadn't brought the peace I thought it would. I hadn't been the same man when I walked into that warehouse, and I wouldn't be the same when I walked out of this room either. There would be no happy ending here, no neatly tied conclusion. Claire was facing her consequences. But what about me? What about the wreckage she had left in her wake? I took a deep breath and glanced at the door in front of me, the door that separated me from the woman who had once been my world. Would I even be able to look her in the eyes? After everything she had done to me, could I truly find it within myself to forgive her? The door opened, and a figure stepped out, one I hadn't expected. It was a familiar face. Nolan. His eyes were narrowed, his expression grim. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice low. "You're not the only one who's been played." I froze. My stomach churned as he continued. Claire, she wasn't the only one being manipulated. There's more to this. More than we realized. My mind raced, heart pounding. What do you mean? Nolan's face tightened. I've been going through the files, the ones you handed me. There's evidence of a much bigger operation, much bigger than anything we thought. Claire wasn't just a pawn, she was a key player in something that stretches far beyond us. I think you're going to need to look a lot deeper. I felt a chill run down my spine. What are you saying? I'm saying this doesn't end with her, Nolan replied, his voice tense. It goes higher. And if you're not careful, you're going to find yourself back in the crosshairs again. I took a step back, the weight of his words crashing down on me. Just when I thought the storm was over, just when I thought I had put everything to rest, it became clear that I had only uncovered the tip of the iceberg. Claire had been more than a simple betrayal. She had been a part of something darker, something far more dangerous. And as the pieces of this new puzzle fell into place, I realized that my fight was far from over. But this time, it wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about survival. Looked at Nolan, the flicker of urgency in his eyes matching my own. How do we stop it? I asked, my voice steady despite the rising panic inside me. Nolan didn't hesitate. We expose the whole thing, all of it, and we make sure they know we're coming for them. The game had changed once again. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. But this time, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. I would finish what I had started, no matter where it led. The final judgment was coming, and I would make sure it was mine. I carefully planned my revenge. Part 11. The Unraveling. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Everything I had believed about Claire, everything I had believed about my life, was just a facade. Behind the lies, there was something far more sinister, something that had been orchestrated from the shadows for far longer than I could have ever imagined. I looked at Nolan, my mind racing. You're telling me she wasn't just playing me. She was playing us. Everyone? Nolan nodded slowly. It's bigger than you think. Claire was just one piece of the puzzle, but she was part of something with far-reaching consequences. I don't think you've even scratched the surface of what's been going on. The weight of his words pressed heavily on my chest. For months, I had thought that uncovering Claire's affair, exposing her betrayal, would be the end of it. But now I understood that I had only uncovered the tip of the iceberg. We need to move quickly, Nolan said, his voice low and urgent. If we don't, whoever's behind this will know we're onto them, and they'll come after you next. I clenched my fists. Whoever they were, they had underestimated me. I wasn't going to be another pawn in their game. This time, I would be the one pulling the strings. Do you have everything we need? I asked, my voice steady despite the rising tension in the air. Nolan pulled out a file from his bag, setting it on the table in front of me. This is just the beginning. These are emails, phone records, financial transactions. Claire's involvement was just one part of the plan. But we've got enough here to start digging deeper. I glanced at the documents spread out before me. Each piece of paper felt like a weight, pulling me further into a labyrinth of lies and deceit. But I wasn't going to back down now, not after everything that had happened. This isn't just about Claire anymore, is it? I asked. No, Nolan replied, his eyes darkening. This is about something far bigger. The people behind this, they have power, influence. They're not going to just let us walk away from this. I nodded slowly, processing the gravity of the situation. Then we need to be smart. We need to stay ahead of them. Nolan gave me a sharp look. Exactly. We start by going after their money trail. Whoever they are, they're hiding behind a wall of accounts, shell companies, and anonymous transactions. If we can follow the money, we can find out who's really behind this. I glanced back at the file, my mind already working through the next steps. The stakes had never been higher. Claire was no longer just a cheater in my life. She was a cog in a much larger, far more dangerous machine. And now, the machine was hunting me. As we moved forward with the investigation, I felt the pressure mounting with each passing day. Every lead I followed seemed to pull me deeper into the shadows, revealing more and more about the web of lies and manipulation that had been carefully constructed around me. I was no longer the victim. I was the hunter. And the truth was within reach. But with every step I took, I felt the presence of the enemy closing in. They were watching me, waiting for me to slip up. The feeling of being hunted, of being in their crosshairs, was no longer a vague threat. It was real. The game had become a dangerous one, and I couldn't afford to make a single mistake. Then, one night, I received an anonymous message. It was simple but chilling. "We know what you're doing. Stop digging, or we'll make sure you regret it." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. The message was clear. They were watching, and they weren't going to stop until I was buried beneath the weight of their secrets. I looked at Nolan, who had been working tirelessly beside me. "They know we're onto them." He didn't seem surprised. "We've been expecting this. They won't stop, not until they've silenced us." A tense silence hung between us. We were both acutely aware of the danger we were in, but neither of us was willing to back down. I had already lost everything: my trust, my marriage, my peace of mind, and I wasn't going to let these people destroy my life any further. "We need to move fast," I said, determination hardening in my voice. "If they think we'll back down, they're wrong. We keep pushing. We find out who's behind this and we expose them, no matter what it takes." Nolan gave a small nod, his eyes steely. "All right, we'll hit them where it hurts. We find the accounts, the connections. We take their power away, and we make sure they know we're not afraid." We were on the edge now. The final confrontation was drawing near, and I knew there would be no turning back once it started. But in the face of everything I had lost and everything I was about to gain, I couldn't stop. I had come too far. We had a target now. And this time, we weren't just hunting for revenge. We were hunting for justice. The pieces were falling into place, and the final play was approaching. I carefully planned my revenge. Part 12. The Tipping Point. The days bled into one another as Nolan and I worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. Each night I sifted through pages of financial records, transaction histories, and encrypted emails, my eyes burning from the strain. With each new piece of evidence, the picture grew clearer, but it also grew more terrifying. Claire had been a part of something far darker than I had ever imagined. Something that reached into the heart of my professional life, my finances, even my very reputation. I began to piece together the names in the files, the people she had been in contact with, the ones who had been pulling the strings from the shadows. They were more powerful than I had ever thought possible. Business tycoons, corrupt politicians, and figures I had once considered allies. But it was her relationship with them, the ties she had built in secret, that terrified me. This was no ordinary affair. Claire had been a player in a game I never knew existed, one that was far beyond my comprehension, and they knew I was getting closer. The anonymous message had been the first warning, but now the threats were becoming more tangible. I found my office had been broken into. Files were missing, personal information had been rifled through, and someone had tampered with the security system. Nolan's phone had been hacked, his private conversations listening in on. It was clear. They were watching us. They were moving in to silence us before we could expose them all. One night, as I sat in front of my computer, a new message flashed across the screen. This time it wasn't a simple warning, it was a direct threat. "Stop now. You have no idea how deep this goes. Walk away before it's too late." The finality of it struck me. They knew. They had always known. But there was no walking away. Not now. I stood up, pacing in frustration. This wasn't just about Claire anymore. This was a war, one that I had been dragged into, but now I had no choice but to fight. I had seen too much, learned too many ugly truths. If I didn't continue, they would come for me. They would bury me in a way that I wouldn't even be able to understand. I grabbed my phone and dialed Nolan's number. He picked up after 2. Rings, his voice low. "Everything all right?" he asked, already knowing what I was going to say. "No," I replied, my mind racing. "We have to go all in. We can't stop. Whatever they're threatening, we need to get ahead of it." "I'm with you," Nolan said, no hesitation in his voice. "But we're on borrowed time. If we're going to do this, we have to move. Quickly. You're already marked." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I don't care. I won't let them win." Nolan paused for a long moment, then spoke again. "We're close. We've got enough to bring them down, but I need to make some calls. I'll need you to keep your head down. If they think we're going public, they'll do whatever it takes to make sure we don't." "I understand," I said, already feeling the weight of the decision. But there was no turning back. We were playing a dangerous game, but we had no choice but to keep moving forward. I had already lost so much, my trust, my peace, my marriage, and now I was on the cusp of losing even more, but the truth needed to come out. These people had no right to tear apart everything I had worked for, everything I had built. As I sat back down at my desk, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small, unmarked envelope on the corner of my desk. It was odd. I hadn't received anything in the mail recently, and I hadn't noticed it earlier. My heart rate quickened as I reached for it. I opened it slowly, pulling out the contents. Inside was a photograph. It was of me, taken from a distance, from a street corner. It was blurry, but unmistakable. Someone had been following me, watching me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned the photograph over, and written in bold letters were 3 words: "You're next." This wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a promise. I stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the reality I was facing sinking in. These people were not playing games. They weren't just trying to protect their secrets. They were out for blood. I folded the photo back into the envelope, and without another word, I grabbed my jacket. I had to meet Nolan. We had no time left to waste. The noose was tightening, and if we didn't act fast, it would be over for both of us. The night air was sharp as I stepped outside, my breath visible in the cold. I got into my car and sped toward the meeting spot. My mind was a blur, adrenaline, and fear mixing together as I drove. The stakes had never been higher. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the moment where everything would either fall into place or shatter completely. When I reached the location, Nolan was already waiting. His eyes were dark, his face tense, but when he saw me, he nodded in approval. "We have what we need," Nolan said quietly. I carefully planned my revenge. Part 13. The Final Gamble. The blinding headlights of the black cars grew larger, their engines growling as they approached, cutting through the silence of the night. My pulse raced. I had known this moment would come, the trap, the reckoning, but now that it was here, I felt a cold rush of dread in my veins. I'd been maneuvering through this dangerous game for so long, pulling strings, outsmarting them at every turn. But now the rules had changed. Now, I was the one being hunted. Nolan's eyes flicked to the cars, and his hand instinctively reached for the gun tucked into his jacket. "We have to move. They'll be on us in seconds." I didn't answer immediately. My mind was racing, trying to process everything in an instant. We had prepared for this, right? The information we had was enough. We could expose them, take them down, but not if we were dead. I stepped away from the car, my feet moving almost mechanically. We've come too far. We can't let them intimidate us now. We need to turn the tables. Nolan glanced at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and resolve. Are you sure you want to do this? We might not get another chance. But I knew, deep down, there was no turning back. I had already lost everything. The person I had been trusting, complacent, naive, was gone. In his place, there was only the relentless pursuit of justice, the unyielding need to expose the truth, no matter the cost. This is it, I said, my voice steady, though my hands betrayed me, trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. We either end this tonight, or we let them win. Without another word, Nolan and I moved in sync, slipping into the shadows of the alley. The black cars screeched to a halt just yards away. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their faces hidden behind sunglasses, their movements precise and calculated. They weren't just hired muscle, they were professionals. People who had dealt with situations like ours before, and likely had no qualms about ending this quickly. We don't have much time, Nolan whispered. You take the left, I'll take the right. On 3. I nodded, my heart thudding in. My chest, one wrong move and this would be the end of everything. But if we played it right, we could have the upper hand. We could expose them, and maybe even get away. I took a deep breath, my fingers brushing the cool metal of the gun tucked into my waistband. Nolan's signal came fast. 1, 2, 3. We moved as one, launching ourselves into action. The sound of gunfire erupted almost immediately, breaking the stillness of the night. But it wasn't coming from us. I froze for a split second, instinctively ducking behind a dumpster as the sharp crack of a gunshot rang out, narrowly missing me. Nolan had already returned fire, his shots steady, calculating. But there were more of them than I had anticipated. Several more men emerged from the shadows, their guns trained on us. "Move!" Nolan shouted, pulling me to my feet. We ran, dodging, behind parked cars, weaving through the darkened streets. My breath came in short gasps, adrenaline and fear pushing me forward. Every step felt like it might be my last. Every sound of a footstep or distant engine like the warning of a predator closing in. There was no way out now, not unless we fought our way through. We reached an old warehouse on the edge of the city, a place I'd scouted days ago as a potential safe house. Its rusted metal doors stood tall and imposing, but it was a place that could hide us, if only for a moment. We bolted inside, securing the door behind us. Panting, I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. My heart was still, racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that every move I made was being watched. They knew we were here. They knew we were desperate. Nolan scanned the room, eyes narrowing. "We can't stay here long. We need a new plan." "We're out of options," I muttered, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "They're closing in. We need to expose them now before they kill us." Suddenly, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Someone was approaching, slowly, deliberately. I peered out from behind a stack of crates, my fingers twitching around the gun once again. I couldn't let fear paralyze me, not now, not when the truth was within reach. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped into the dimly lit warehouse. It was one of them. The man from the black car, his face now illuminated under the faint glow of a flickering light. "Good evening," he said smoothly, his voice calm and cold, like a predator savoring its moment before the kill. "I think it's time we end this, don't you?" Nolan tensed beside me, but I raised my hand to stop him. We didn't have time to act recklessly. If we were going to make it out of here alive, we needed to outsmart them, not just fight. The Kiao man took another step closer, his hand reaching into his coat. "You've been quite the thorn in our side, you know. I carefully planned my revenge." Part 14. The Final Showdown. The files were out there now, spilling their secrets into the hands of those who could turn the tide. The world was about to see the truth for what it was, no longer hidden by the veils of lies and manipulation. The man's composure faltered as he watched the screen of my phone, his lips pressing into a thin line. The tide was shifting. "Do you really think this will change anything?" he asked, his voice low but laced with venom. "You've made a mistake and now you'll pay for it." I held his gaze. Every ounce of my resolve poured into the words I spoke next. "The only mistake I made was thinking that you could be trusted. Now it's your turn to pay. The truth is out there, and you can't control it." "Not anymore." His eyes flickered with something. Panic, maybe? It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I had him rattled. The truth, the undeniable weight of everything they'd hidden, was finally in the open. And there was no coming back from it. He reached for his gun, but before he could pull it, I was already on the move. Nolan was quicker, already in motion and diving toward the man in one swift movement, his hands locking onto his wrist and forcing the weapon away. The struggle was brief, tense, and it was clear that the man underestimated us. "Do you think I didn't plan for this?" I asked, my voice a low growl as I stood up, eyes locked onto him. "You think you're the only one with a few tricks up your sleeve?" With one swift motion, I yanked the phone from his grip and tossed it aside, making sure to destroy the connection that linked him to his higher-ups. A small victory, but it felt like the first true step toward taking control. But we couldn't let up. He was still dangerous, still connected, still a threat. And as the seconds ticked by, I knew the time to act was slipping away. If we didn't move now, they'd strike back with even more force. Nolan's voice broke through the tension. "We need to get out of here now. They'll be coming for us." I nodded, eyes darting around the dark warehouse. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of movement felt amplified. We were deep in enemy territory now and the walls were closing in. But I had one last move to make before we could go. I stepped forward, forcing the man to his knees, keeping my hand firmly on the back of his neck as I leaned in close. "Tell me who's behind all of this. Who else is involved? Who's pulling the strings?" For a moment, he didn't answer. His eyes flashed with fear, genuine fear this time. He was broken, his facade crumbling. I had him. "Tell me," I repeated. My voice cold, unyielding. Finally, he spoke, his voice a mere rasp. "You won't stop them. You can't. They'll—" Before he could finish his sentence, there was a loud bang, a crash that shook the building to its core. The force sent me stumbling back, my vision blurring for an instant as the world seemed to split open. The warehouse door had burst open, and in the frame stood a tall, imposing figure, another man, one I hadn't expected. He was wearing a dark suit, the kind that was tailored to perfection, but it wasn't his appearance that made my blood run cold. It was the gun in his hand and the sheer calmness with which he aimed it at me. "You didn't think we'd let this end so easily, did you?" The voice was smooth, like silk, but with the chilling edge of a predator. I recognized him instantly. It was Elliot Vance. I felt the familiar knot of dread tighten in my gut. Vance had been a ghost for so long. A name that whispered through the underworld like a shadow. The Fixer. The one who never lost. "I didn't expect it to be this easy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to mask the fear I could feel creeping in. "You really thought you had control, didn't you?" Vance's lips curved into a faint smile, but it was empty, devoid of any real amusement. "I'm not here to exchange pleasantries. I'm here to finish what you've started." I glanced over at Nolan, who was crouched behind a nearby stack of crates, his hand on his gun. He'd be ready when the time came. "You've underestimated me," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Vance. "You've always underestimated the power of the truth." For a brief moment, I saw doubt flicker across Vance's eyes. It was fleeting, gone as quickly as it had appeared, but it was enough to fuel the fire inside me. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't untouchable. He was just another man with a gun, hiding behind layers of lies and manipulation. I moved fast, my fingers finding the hidden transmitter in my coat pocket. It was a last-ditch effort, but it was the only chance we had. I turned it on, sending the last batch of encrypted files to every news outlet I could reach. Vance's eyes widened as the screen of my phone lit up once again, and within seconds, the last piece of the puzzle was out in the open. The truth was going to expose everything, his connections, his schemes, and most importantly, his crimes. The final act. Aftermath and justice. The night air was cold against my skin, but I barely felt it. The adrenaline still coursed through me, my heart pounding in my chest as I rushed through the streets with Nolan. We moved quickly, knowing that time was our enemy, but also feeling the weight of what had just transpired. The final move had been made, and the world would never be the same. We didn't talk much, but the silence between us spoke volumes. There was a certain relief in it, a feeling that we were no longer prisoners of Claire's schemes, no longer pawns in someone else's game. Yet there was still a lingering unease, the kind that settled deep in your bones when you realized just how far the darkness stretches. As we reached the safe house, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to loosen, but only slightly. The truth was out, but that didn't mean the danger was over. Vance was still out there, and there were other shadows lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was far from over. The final chapter was yet to be written. The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls, meetings with the lawyer, and late-night strategizing. The encrypted files I had sent out were now in the hands of the authorities and major news outlets. The world was waking up to the twisted reality Claire and Vance had woven. And even though the news was exploding across every channel, part of me couldn't shake the feeling that they would retaliate. They always did. I didn't sleep much that week. The quiet of the early mornings felt strange, as though the calm was temporary, just a lull before the storm. I kept going through the files in my hands, looking for any cracks I could exploit, any final threads that might unravel the entire conspiracy. Claire and Vance's empire was crumbling, but I had to make sure it was inescapable. And then, one morning, a call came through, an unexpected one. "Is this Mr. Lockwood?" The voice on the other end said. It was a voice I recognized instantly. It was David Mercer. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cool, betraying none of the anger I felt. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry for everything. I never thought it would go this far," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I've been following the news. I saw the files you sent out, and Save it," I snapped. "You had your chance to make things right. Don't try to play the victim now." He was silent for a moment. I didn't know about Vance, about what he was really doing. All I cared about was Claire. And I was stupid. But I didn't want this. Not like this. "You're a coward." "David," I said coldly, "you were too weak to stand up for what was right. Now you'll face the consequences of your choices, so save your apologies. They mean nothing." I hung up before he could respond. The truth had exposed everything. His guilt, Claire's lies, and Vance's manipulation. There was no place for him to hide anymore. But the phone calls didn't stop there. The next few days were filled with messages from people I never expected to hear from. There were those who wanted to cut ties with Claire and Vance, people who had been unknowingly dragged into their schemes. Some were remorseful, while others were simply looking for a way to protect themselves. It was clear now that everyone had been complicit in some way. Some knew what was happening and turned a blind eye. Others were so caught up in their own ambitions that they didn't care who they trampled on to get ahead. But none of them would escape the consequences. The day of the press conference was fast approaching. The authorities had finally caught up to Claire, her arrest imminent, and Vance was nowhere to be found. His name had become synonymous with corruption and betrayal, and it seemed that the walls were closing in on him. I stood in front of the mirror, my reflection barely recognizable to me anymore. I had been through so much in the past months, and I wasn't the same person who had walked into that first confrontation with Claire. There was a hardness to me now, a coldness that I didn't know I had. And yet, underneath that exterior, there was something else, a part of me that had healed, maybe not fully, but enough to look ahead. As I turned away from the mirror, Nolan walked in, his expression grave. "The press conference is happening in a few hours. You ready for this?" I nodded. I've been ready for a long time. We were about to expose everything: Claire, Vance, and the depths of their betrayal. The world would finally know what they had done, and there would be no turning back. The room was filled with reporters, cameras flashing, the air thick with anticipation. I took my place at the podium, my heart steady. The moment had come. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice firm, unwavering. "I'm here to tell you the truth about my wife's betrayal, about the man she manipulated, and about the web of lies that has destroyed so many lives. This is not just my story.